Okay, Happy New Year. I was asked to sort of give my rundown of an executive order that Trump signed or put into place on December 28th that I was unaware of. So I appreciate you pointing it out to me um, and asked for my review of it and then sort of an explanation of what that means potentially to families out there. And so let's get right to it. I have it over here to the, I guess it would be your right. I don't know. I'm not that computer literate, so I'm gonna. Oh, there you go. See, if I go to my left, it goes to your right. Okay. So the executive order is on expanding educational opportunity through school choice. Now, I know a lot of people will sit there and go, "Oh, I hate school choice." I don't hate school choice. And, where a lot of people get it wrong is they sit there and they go, "Well, school choice is the destruction of public education." No. Um, I think that we do need to rethink the school options within even public education because I do not agree that a person's zip code should confine them to underperforming or failing schools. I absolutely do not agree with that. And so we do have room to rethink that. I also am one of these believers that we need to rethink how we fund our schools because how we fund our schools and then how we determine funding. A lot of that is determined by butts and seats, which is what drives this truancy monster um, that ends up catching up or catching in its web or its nets kids not intended to be um, in trouble for truancy or their parents, meaning those kids with chronic illnesses that should have 504 plans or do have 504 plans, um, kids with IEPs with chronic issues, including mental health, anxiety, you name it. These kids are being caught in this net because of this nonsense with regards to how we fund our schools, which then drives this obsession with school attendance. Also, every Student Succeeds Act has some additional caveats in there, with regards to time, school attendance, because, the studies say that, kids that go to school, um, some of it's quoted in this executive order or cited in this executive order, and that's fine. Um, but even though I do agree with it that education is very important, if kids go, and the end result it has in their lives, at the same time, there's always exceptions to those rules when it comes to a child's health, when it comes to their mental health, when it comes to their emotional health, and I think that that gets caught underneath the wheels of this fast churning bus of funding. Um, and catches a lot of schools and negatively impacts families. So with that being said, this executive order, I absolutely agree with it. I think it's tremendous that President Trump did this. I am so grateful he did it. Now, if Biden ends up becoming the president later this month, then we'll see what he ends up doing with this. If he allows it to continue forward or he rescinds um, this executive order. But a lot of the reason that Trump put this executive order in place was because of the inaction of Congress in the most recent bill in sort of providing the necessary relief that I think they were intended or supposed to do. Because a lot of people will sit there and say, well, it's December 28th. Why didn't he do this earlier? Well, it's not really the president's job, guys. It's Congress's job to sit there and um, appropriate money. It's not the president's job to sit there and just create law out of thin air or create programs out of thin air. The executive branch is there to execute the law, to apply the law, and to apply these programs that Congress develop and that Congress funds. Okay, so just you need to understand basic civics and understand that Trump stayed in his lane. All right, and because Congress didn't act, he found a mechanism to do this through an emergency program through the Department of Health and Human Services. And you go, well, the Department of Health and Human Services isn't education. Well, true, but at the same time, the Department of Health and Human Services is the one that oversees the Head Start program. All right. So there are mechanisms within it that are education pertinent and education relevant, to the point where, he felt justified as the president in his role, to help alleviate some of the pain being suffered by low income and families in general, but mainly low income families. And we're going to go down this list. I highlighted some major points, and we're going to discuss this for a little bit so that you understand. And like I said, I agree with the context. The one last thing I want to point out is that obviously it's being done because of the damage done of during 2020 related to COVID. I am not one of the believers that believe that COVID is the one that did this damage. I do not believe that a virus has done the damage that has occurred. Humans make decisions, and they make very bad decisions, very bad policy decisions based upon incomplete information. And there's been a lot of wild guesses. There's been some, solid science that later came back to be not so solid science, which quite frankly is science. You're always looking for the next best answer, solidified with a consensus. So, chasing science is great. I love that. At the same time, I also keep my eyes open, understanding that when we reach consensus with this response, what it should do is just bring up more questions that then need to go through that scientific process. And that stuff takes time. Well, a lot of these decisions related to COVID with regards to government needed to be made in real time with incomplete scientific data, with scientific data that had not reached the point of consensus, that had not gone through the rigors of the scientific process. And so therefore governments made decisions based upon that incomplete information. And, you sit there and you go, well, what else could you do? Well, in some ways you couldn't. You make the best choices you can. At the same time, some of this stuff is just nonsense, draconian, and damaging. And people should be held accountable for the damage that they've done to human lives because of their reactions, poor reactions and poor decisions that then have impacted families. And not only that, it's impacted families in such a disparate way. All right, because professional families, those with that work in government jobs, it did not. This 2020 did not impact professional families, those with high degrees, depending on the level of degrees and the manner of your work, a lot of the stuff just moved home, moved virtual, unaffected, still got paid. Then you have the people in government jobs that have been paid this whole time, whether they're working or not. In most, I'm not going to say across the board that there weren't some that were furloughed or laid off. I'm just saying on the whole, the government people continued to get paychecks as well, including public educators, for not having the schools open for in-person services, which means that there was a trickle-down effect to where working families, whether professional or not, especially with special needs children, some of them could not work because there was not the normal schedule or mechanism to educate their child during the work hours. And then the education of the child then fell back on the parents, which, if the parents sign their children up for a public education, they're basically saying, educating my child is not my responsibility. I am delegating that because I've enrolled my child into this school. Now, that's either public education, parochial school, private school, doesn't matter. See, we homeschool. My wife homeschools our 3 sons. My daughter goes to public school because she has an IEP. Now, in that way, we have said that we need to delegate my daughter's services because that's out of our pay grade. But with regards to our sons, we've taken that responsibility. So you'll never hear coming out of my mouth, well, we need to. And the reason I bring that up is I've seen way too many rabble rouser comments that public education isn't a babysitting service. Nobody ever said it was. It should be an education entity, and that education entity should be looking at itself with the utmost respect, and they're not looking at themselves with the utmost respect. So don't be surprised when people badmouth education if you're not looking at yourself on the same level as our frontline healthcare workers, police, and firefighters that are all going to work and putting themselves at risk. And if you want to call it that, hell, Walmart employees are putting themselves at risk and they're going every day. But to sit there and have educators sit there and say, well, we're not going to go every day, we don't believe it's safe, that sends a message, whether you like that or not, whether you agree with me, whether you get really angry inside, I don't care, guys. It sends a message to people that you don't value yourself as essential. You don't value yourself as important in this process. And I think that you're absolutely critical for our society. But you might have done yourself in because, see, this has gone on too long. And it's gone on too long, which means that people get into new habits and people find alternate solutions, or parents become convinced now or bolster their confidence that, you know what, I think I can get a hang of this homeschooling thing. And I can tell you that you're going to find out real quick that you're not as essential as you might puff yourself up to think you are, because there is no monopoly on what you do. A lot of educators out there. My wife's one. Now, does she have a degree? No, but my son took the ACT and was in one of the top percentiles. He did just fine. And going to a top rated university. And, we didn't need public education to achieve that, or private school. So bravo to my wife for her hard efforts, and also to my son. So just keep that in mind. When you sit there and you go, well, I don't need this stuff, or we don't feel okay. The one final thought before I tear into this is that understand that, when it comes to handling this virus or this kind of an emergency, this is not a federal duty. This is not President Trump or Congress. That's just not how our structured government works. They don't have police powers. The states have police powers, which means the governors are the main ones responsible for the COVID responses. And then the local governments after that, depending on the size of the cities. And that's why wherever you go, let's say you're in Texas, Texas could be opened, or let's say Florida. Florida's a better example because, DeSantis, the governor, opened it up. Okay. That doesn't mean that individual cities or county governments don't have their own restrictions in there, their own mandates, because that's how government works. And because state and local government have police powers, meaning they have enforcement powers, the federal government can't do that. They can't sit there and say, Galini, you need to wear a mask, or what? What are you going to do? Who are you going to send over to my house? Whereas a state can do that. They can send, they have that power to fine me, to arrest me, to imprison me, to charge me. They have that power. The federal government doesn't have that power under these situations. So these are state and local functions. So it is. So all these people that badmouth how Trump did a horrible job with the COVID response, you need to take a civics lesson, because it's not. This isn't Biden. If Biden becomes the president, he's going to do the same thing Trump did. I think Trump did an excellent job. We got a vaccine before the end of the year, which is super fast tracked. Impossible, but it was done. All the logistics, hospital ships, anything that everybody needed, we never went without. That's the only role that the federal government had, was logistics and support, and that was done. Can't force states to open up, can't force states to close. All the states did that independently, 50 of them. And some did a good job, some did not do a good job. I happen to live in a state that's been closed since March, has not reopened, and we've all been masked since May. Hasn't done a damn bit of difference. Still have the same rates as everyone else, including those states that are open up. So, that's sort of why I am a little bit, have my very strong opinions about things, because I live in a very, very restricted state. And, there's been no entertainment, no sports for anybody, nothing. I mean, all the restaurants are closed. If you want to eat, you have to eat outside, inside, outside. And then they pump warm air into the tents outside so we can eat in restaurants. So you can't eat inside, but you can eat outside. But it's winter, so it's still outside, but inside outside. Go figure. I don't know. None of this stuff makes sense. All right. So that is sort of so because of the states and the local governments, meaning the local school boards as well, not opening up, not doing what they're supposed to with regards to, and there's going to be differences of opinions, guys. There's plenty of you out there. I already know what your opinions are, okay? And you'll poo-poo me, that, oh, how dare you? I'm not making light of anything. This is just reality. There's some schools that have not reopened. There's some schools that have done a piss poor job of providing multiple options. There's some schools that have been opened and then have refused to provide virtual options for the families with high-risk children. I don't agree with them. So, there needs to be a continuity of all kinds of services, including in person, mainly in person. But we also need to accommodate those families that have high-risk individuals. They live with family members that are high risk. Those options should be available. So if they live in a state where they're saying, well, it's in person or nothing, I don't agree with that either. And I fight those schools in order to expand those options for families that do feel that way. My main angst is that there's schools in my tightly closed state that, the whole state. They won't even open the schools. The school that my daughter goes to will not have in-person services this entire school year. They already made that announcement. It's all virtual for the entire school year. It's an impossibility to provide a FAPE for my daughter virtually. But, I made a different deal with my school, and so my daughter's fine. But it's all those other families that don't know about me that are getting railroaded big time, because there's absolutely no reason there shouldn't be in-person options. But a lot of this stuff is being mandated by the union because they have a very strong union here, and the union just will not allow in-person services. So, that sort of drives some of my feelings about that. All right, I'm going to switch over my screen, and we can go down this list and then sort of explain, what you need to look for if you fit into that category with regards to this block grant he's talking about with the Health and Human Services. Okay, so he talks about his authority in that first part, but then the purpose, okay, why he's doing it. And I'm going to sort of just gloss over, you can read it, I've added the link. But the state and local shut down in-person learning for the vast majority of more than 56 million elementary and secondary school students beginning in late February and early March, which we know happened. And then the prolonged deprivation of in-person learning opportunities has produced undeniably dire consequences for children of the country. And it talks about the CDC has stated that school attendance is negatively correlated with the child's risk of depression and various types of abuse, which is absolutely true. So we've seen a huge decrease in the number of mandatory reports to DHR and CPS. And a lot of that is because a lot of those were guys, some of you teachers, you're watchdogs, you're sheepdogs. And, you identify children that are in abusive households because they do exist, Well, those numbers have gone plummeted with regards to those reports because schools aren't open. So those children are confined in these environments, abusive environments, with nobody to help them because some of these schools are closed, or some of these schools are closed and don't have access to be able to be the watcher. American Academy of Pediatrics found that school closures had substantial impact on food security, physical activity of children and families. Absolutely true. Thank you, President Trump. Absences from school, including virtual learning, have nearly doubled. We know that to be absolutely true. In some instances, guys, the scores have just plummeted, and a number of kids not even logging on at all, not participating at all. I mean, to the point where some schools don't even know where some of these kids are, if they even exist anymore, and they're mostly at risk, vulnerable, poor, low-income kids. Shame on these schools. School closures are especially difficult for family with children with special needs. Thank you, President. Schools provide not only academic supports for students with special needs, but they also provide much needed in-person therapies and services, including physical and occupational therapies. Recent survey, I want to look at this survey. 80% of the children with special needs not receiving services and supports to which they are entitled to, which means that they're not receiving a FAPE. And then approximately 40% of children with special needs are receiving no services or support, which I know is happening. Now, like I said, I want to look at the survey to check those numbers, but I can tell you definitively in my world, as far as my caseloads, I see both, and I see both happening big time in big numbers. Either it's the virtual isn't cutting it, or some of these hybrid are not cutting it at all. Or I have clients, especially in these states where they will not reopen for in-person services, and the virtual just doesn't work for these kids. They're not receiving any services, and the schools are just full of excuses. And most of it is, well, it's not our fault. Yeah, it is. You're not thinking through the problem. Okay. Moreover, the survey found that virtual learning may not be fully accessible to these students, as children with special needs are twice as likely to receive little or no remote learning to be dissatisfied with those options, which is absolutely true. For many families on this group, they would be able to say, yes, that's true. Now, low-income minority children are also disproportionately affected by school closures. In low-income zip codes, the students' math progress decreased by nearly 50%, while school buildings were closed in the spring. The math progress of students in middle-income zip codes fell by almost a third. So you see how we have a bigger drop in low-income zip codes compared to middle income. And he explains that later to where, like I had said in the beginning of this video, the professional households and those, there's a huge disparity in how this has impacted families across this country and the people with the political power in this country. Guys, and this is a reality. The people with the political power or clout in this country have been largely unaffected by this virus, or by the governmental decisions on how to handle this virus. The people that have been devastated by this virus are the ones that don't have a voice, which is the working poor and the blue collar. And guys, I'm tired of it. That's why I've been a little bit far more vocal. In the beginning, I've never agreed. My position has never changed since April. Never changed on how I believe that the government should have handled this situation going back to April. It has not changed. It has not changed now. I don't have any patience anymore because I see the human cost that this is having on people, low-income families, and it's so outright discriminatory to sit there and say, well, you're going to close your businesses. You can't work. You're not essential. And to where everybody else that are getting paid and live comfortably can sit there and think that and pat themselves on the shoulder that somehow they're helping by, remaining in place and not doing anything and not living. Well, that might be fine for you, But to sit there and agree with these lockdowns is so short-sighted and damaging to people that you don't hang out with. You don't know how the other half lives. You have no idea the devastating damage that's being done. Governmental decisions, how those governmental decisions are absolutely devastating our low income and our blue collar families. And then, of course, that carries over and absolutely devastates their children. There's long-term economic effects on children and their families. Oh, and up here, recent analysis projected that if in-person classes do not fully resume, Hispanic, Black, and low-income students will lose 9.2, 10.3, and 12.4 months of learning, respectively. That's what the cost is going to be. And not only that this is what I do know, because I did read that study, that on average, these students could lose 61, the average student could lose $61 to $82,000 in lifetime earnings because of last year. Just 1 year, guys. Just 1 year of the devastating effects where our education system didn't view itself like frontline workers. But can't make them view themselves that way, you know. I viewed myself that way, but I was limited in somewhat. And I know a lot of you out there that are teachers and administrators that are held back, that feel the same way I do, but held back by either the union or the decisions of your Board of Education or your state governor. You know, I don't blame you. You know, you're sort of caught between a rock and an impossible hard place. So 2019, more than 90% of children under the age of 18 had at least one employed parent. So you see how keeping them at home really did financially impact families as well. Without the resumption of in-person learning, the economic and social harms resulting in such loss of employment opportunities will continue to compound. So to mitigate these harms, this is what he says he's going to do. The Department of Health and Human Services recently announced additional relief for low-income parents by allowing states to use funds available through the Child Care and Developmental Fund to subsidize child care services and services that supplement academic instruction for children under the age of 13 who are participating in virtual instruction. Nevertheless, virtual instruction is an adequate substitute for in-person learning opportunities, and this aid is insufficient to meet current needs. Okay? So what he's saying is that they recently announced additional relief, the Department of Health and Human Services. So he's tapping into that with this executive order. So while some families, especially those with financial means, have been able to mitigate school disruptions through in-person options such as homeschooling, private schools, charter schools, for many families, their children's residentially assigned public school remains their only financially available option, which means our mid-income, low-income, out in the sticks, rural, where they don't have these other options available, they're being devastated, guys. Okay, the children, including those with special needs, are being underserved due to the public education system's failure to provide in-person learning options. And, you know, guys, he's speaking truth. And I know you don't like it, some of you, but it's true. So President Trump is committed to ensuring that all children of our great nation have access to educational resources. They need to obtain highly qualified education, improving student safety and well-being, including empowering families with emergency learning scholarships. So Section 2 is how he provides that. So providing emergency learning scholarships for students. So he's ordering the Secretary of Health and Human Services to take steps consistent with law to allow funds available through the Community Services Block Grant Program. So that's what you would need to Google under the Health and Human Services Department, is you would need to Google the Community Services Block Grant. And, you know, of course, this is the first real business day since he announced this. You know, it was sort of tucked between, you know, upcoming New Year's holiday and right after Christmas. So you need to start looking now. but through this Community Services Block Grant Program to be used by grantees and eligible entities to provide emergency learning scholarships to disadvantaged families for use by any child without access to in-person learning. These scholarships may be used for tuition and fees for private or parochial schools, homeschool, micro schools, and learning pod costs. Fantastic. Special education, right down here, guys. Look at this. Special education and related services, including therapies, or tutoring or remedial education. This last part is just, your legalese, not really applicable. But this is, and so you need to log on, and it will give you the parameters of how you would qualify and what you need to do to submit that. But what a tremendous sort of opening up of additional financial resources, especially since Congress dropped the ball. And then a lot of these states and these local governments continue to refuse to follow the science, refuse to follow their gut, common sense, reason. It doesn't matter. And a lot of this stuff is being driven by unions, or it's been highly politicized during 2020 for the express purposes of playing politics. And so I can tell you, in some of these states, shame on them, and I will never forget. But with that being said, Health and Human Services, they're going to have their own website, so it's not going through the education department, has nothing to do with DeVos. So you need to go to Health and Human Services, and then you would type in Google or look for explanations of, let's say, President Trump's executive order, or you would need to look at or type in community, the block grant program, and then follow those how they're going to implement that. And hopefully they do it quickly. And hopefully if Biden ends up becoming president at the end of the month, then hopefully he continues this. Who knows? And we'll see. But regardless, I feel like this is a positive. Bravo to President Trump. I know some of you hate his guts, very mention of his name, and I never understood that. He's just a person, imperfect like all the rest of them. I just don't, there hasn't been a president that I've liked for, most of my lifetime, because I'm so anti-war. The one thing I appreciate about Trump is he can get us into any more, international conflicts, and has been striving for peace in places. And we're a republic. We're not an empire, and we should stop acting like an empire. So, that tends to be at the top of my sort of list of things not to do. And so our prior presidents have been real quick to invade countries, bomb people that I have no issue with. I have such a disdain for that. And then also the mental and emotional impact that has on our veterans or on our soldiers, to put them in situations to where, it has absolutely nothing to do with our freedom whatsoever. It's just damaging. So in that regard, I appreciate that about Trump. Do I think his tweets are juvenile? Yeah, but no different than, tolerating 8 years of Obama, referring to himself, 536 times in a speech, in any speech. There's different levels of narcissism, and I just don't look at these people as demigods or anything other than human beings that make mistakes. But sometimes they do good things, and this is a good thing. So I appreciate that.